Baseplan Presents video features some tips and tricks within Baseplan Enterprise, focusing on the following areas: setting up favorites and changing captions, grouping and searching with the grid layout, changing a screen tabbing sequence, setting up dashboards and hot sheets, auditing field changes in each screen, fixing the Excel layout when exporting reports.
Okay, so I'm currently logged into Baseplan Enterprise, and what we want to do in this video is actually walk you through some tips and tricks on how you can actually utilize Baseplan Enterprise a little bit better. Now, some of these things might be very obvious and you might already know them. Some of them might be a little bit more hidden and you might not be aware, but either way, the goal of this video is to give you a little bit some insight and some ways that you can actually utilize the Baseplan Enterprise system a little bit better. So we're going to start off with some really basic things, and then we'll work in to make it a little bit more complicated, or things that might be more hidden. So on the left here, we have all of our different menu items. Now what I can do is I can actually set up my favorites down here. So when a user logs in, they see their favorite screens. Now the way that we can actually set this up is by going into a particular screen. So maybe I'm a service manager and I'm going into the service call screen every single day. Now, rather than me going into the equipment management module and going to service calls, I can actually go up to this star and actually set this as a favorite. So this will actually move that service call down to the favorite section. And I can also put in a shortcut key. So I can say Control-Alt-C, for instance. And when I hit save, that'll actually create the favorite down the bottom here. And if I wanted to, I can also just start putting in Control-Alt-C, and that'll actually open up a new service call screen. Now, if I wanted to actually review all those shortcuts as well, I can always right-click on this and go to the all hotkeys, and it'll actually show me all the shortcuts as well for the different screens that I've got set up. Now, when I do actually have these screens on the bottom here as well, what I want to talk about is that it creates these different tabs. Now, in addition to these tabs, I can actually go up to the top right-hand section again and click on this pop-out area. So I can actually click on this and it'll actually pop out that screen into another layer. And then I can actually move that onto another monitor potentially. And it just gives me some more flexibility around with that screen. I can always go back into the Baseplan Enterprise main system as well. Now, what I also want to talk about is how we can actually rename fields. So you might not be using every single field within Baseplan. So what we can actually do is, if I was just to filter on this, we can see here that maybe we're not using this priority field maybe. So what I can actually do is, if I have the right security, I can actually right-click on this and I can actually rename this particular thing. So I can actually call this job ID or whatever the field is that you might want to use. And so then you can tell people to potentially start using that field and report on that data. It just gives you some flexibility around maybe potentially hijacking fields that can be used for other purposes. It also allows you to potentially rename an existing field that might be more relevant with your users based on a naming convention. Now, I want to talk about the grid system within Baseplan as well. So if I went into, say, a customer invoicing screen, we have the ability to go into data sheet view. And just to talk through what that exactly means is any blue fields allows me to basically choose a drop down, or I can type in a value and it will allow me to filter on that particular record. So it will only show me records that have that particular filter. And so I click on this data sheet view and it'll give me all the records in the system that relate to that particular filter. Now what I can do is with every screen in Baseplan has this grid section at the top. What I can actually do is I can right click on this and I can start doing this show group by box. And so the power of this is it allows me to then start dragging any of these fields into that group by box. If I did customer code, for instance, it'll actually group all the records that it's brought through into that particular grouping, which is customer code. Now, what I might also want to do is I might want to start finding or filtering data by this grid as well. So maybe I know the person's phone number, for instance. So what I can do is I can actually right click on this and go to the find button, or the show filter button, sorry. And I can start typing in a value here. So I can say 7, for instance, and it will show me all the records in here that have the value that matches with the filter. And so it also allows you to narrow down and find records that you might want. Now, what we can also do is that when you do have this set up, you can also right click and then hit the save layout. And that will actually allow you to save it just for your user. Or if you're an administrator, you can also save it for the entire company. Again, that really comes down to what your security setup is with those particular users and their roles. So now within that grid, another thing that we can actually utilize is the tabbing sequence. So often when we're actually adding a new record, we might start in a particular field and we might start tabbing through the different areas of the screen. What we can actually do is, if you have the right security, you can go Control-Alt-Shift-T, and you can see here I can actually change the tabbing sequence within Baseplan. So I can actually click on this to say that's the first one, and then drag that across, and then sort of work my way through here. And then when I exit the screen, it'll ask me if I wanted to actually save this new tabbing sequence. So it is a good way for you to basically know what fields people need to enter in terms of the data, and then change that tabbing sequence based upon that process as well. Now once we another thing that I sort of want to talk through is this home screen, which people would have seen, and these dashboards that we can actually pull through automatically. So when you are using something like Power BI, it's actually going to give you a web page, and that web page is something that we can actually display in this home screen. Now, what we can actually do is that we can actually, when a user is set up in our security menu, we can say that when a particular user logs in, show a particular dashboard. So if I clicked on Nancy, for instance, I can say that this is the URL, which will be that dashboard for when Nancy logs in. So you can have dashboards per person, but we can also just have a generic dashboard. So if I went to System Parameters and just typed in dashboard, so we can see here, we also have the dashboard URL here, where we can actually start putting in that particular URL. So when someone logs in, that particular dashboard will populate for all users. So we can set up dashboards for individual users or for all users. Now, another thing I want to talk through is actually these hot sheets at the top. So we can actually also create these hot sheets, which allow us to create these different exception reports for when people log in as well. So we might have something like contracts that require a purchase order, equipment in pickup, transfers older than 1 day, units down for more than 15 days, unallocated service shop, whatever the exception is that we want to report on. So when someone logs in, rather than running a report, they can actually view this data as well. And you can see here we can create different types. So maybe expired loans, an accounts receivable, hot sheet maybe, an accounts payable, whatever the scenario might be. And look, the benefit of using something like a hot sheet is that you can actually drill straight into that data as well. So if I double click on this, it'll actually look at that particular record that I'm actually clicking on, and it will open up the screen with that data already pre-filled with everything. So we can see here, it's taking me through to that rental contract automatically, then I can start actioning that. So another thing I want to talk through is how we can actually audit data on a screen as well. So you can see here, there's going to be these 2 feet. So when we can actually click on this and we can filter, it'll actually show me every single change that's occurred on that particular screen and what field was changed and the date and time and all that sort of stuff. So that we can actually start checking who's made what changes to the screen, if there was an error or a mistake that might have been occurred, and we can sort of narrow it down to who the exact user was and when they did it. Now, another thing I want to talk through is how we can actually export data to Excel, especially from a reporting standpoint. So if I go to the general ledger, for example, and look at a more complex report, like a P&L, so if I go P&L this year, I'm sure all of you, potentially if you've been exporting data out for any type of report, when you put it to Excel, it can sometimes change the format and layout a little bit. So if I went to preview and I wanted to then export this particular crystal report into Excel, there would be some issues around the format in itself. So I can view this particular P&L report and work through it. But if I went up to this Excel button and exported it to Excel, we can see here that the layout sort of changes a little bit. And it's a bit harder for me to sort of work through and change the data or do some reporting or whatever it might be. So what I can actually do is, rather than clicking on the Export Excel button from here, if we go back one screen, after we've done our filters here, you'll see here there's actually a button called Export to Excel. So if I click on this, you'll see that the difference here is, rather than trying to export and convert the report, it's going to go straight to the table itself and give it to you in a better tabular format. So you can see here it's got all the columns and rows, so you can actually start reporting on that a bit easier. Really handy when you've got quite a complex report that you might want to export out to Excel potentially. All right, well, look, this is a few tips that I thought I would try and show you guys, and hopefully it's given you a little bit of insight. If you do have any questions or any ideas on future topics, please leave a comment in the section below. If you have any questions around what I've shown you as well, please feel free to reach out to myself, or you can reach out to your account manager, and we'll be gladly able to help you and sort of work through those processes.